Sales Rep Radio.
Hi, everybody. This is Dan Walker, and this is Sales Rep Radio, a presentation of timeless sales tips and best practices from some of the world's most talented sales consultants. It's news from your world, and it starts right now.
Hot tips, Sales Rep Radio.
Positive persuasion and winning without intimidation. What's that? Well, it's a method used by many successful sales reps who know that it's easier to get agreement by keeping the conversation upbeat and positive. What's the key to doing that? Bob Burg, prolific speaker, author, and sales consultant, is here to help us chart a course. Bob, great to have you here on Sales Rep Radio.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Winning without intimidation. I guess you're going to have to explain that concept to me.
Yeah, really, it's nothing more than how to master the art of positive persuasion in today's real world in order to get what you want, when you want, from whom you want, including the difficult people we all come across every day. And while this system works for anyone with whom you're dealing, you'll find a real great application in sales as well. You know, the fact is we all come across difficult people. Now, most people are genuinely nice and want to be helpful, but let's face it, they're not the ones who discourage us on our pursuit of happiness. So, you know, in a sense, we've all at times had to deal with a customer service representative who was not providing good customer service, a civil servant who was, quite frankly, neither civil nor a servant. And then there's the nasty neighbor, difficult family member with whom you can't seem to communicate without it breaking down into fighting or yelling or bad feelings. But then there's also the prospect, the customer or client who's less than amiable and making it difficult for us to serve them. And that doesn't help them, us, or anyone else involved. You know, and then there are the people internally within a company. You know, there are the outside and the inside people. And sometimes the inside people can be a real, pain in the neck to deal with, you know, and get them to really help the customer. So we're talking really a holistic way of getting it so that you can get what you want, but again, make that other person feel good about it and good about you so that in the future, they're also even that much more willing to accept your ideas.
So what you're saying, Bob, is there's a not-so-fine line between convincing someone and persuading them.
You're totally right. Anyone who is a professional salesperson, we can convince a person beyond a shadow of a doubt, let's say, that we are absolutely right and they are totally, completely, 100% wrong. But then let me ask you, what is that person most likely to change either in their action or even thought process by being so convinced by us? Probably nothing. As a matter of fact, human nature sort of dictates that when a person has an idea and then feels as though they're being convinced of something, even though intellectually they may agree, emotionally they're more likely to even stick with their initial thought, with their initial way of acting.
So persuasion is what it's all about, and it's in our best interest to master it. But Bob, do you have any persuasion advice for us that would transcend specific industries?
Yeah, I think the basic principles of persuasion, actually, they do transcend industry. And, you look at it this way, and I'm a big believer. I like to define my terms. And if you look in Webster's, to win is to succeed or prevail in a contest or effort, to triumph, to be victorious. Now, to persuade is to cause someone to do something they ordinarily would not do. When you persuade someone, you cause that person to take action, and that's the key. See, convincing doesn't cause action. Persuasion, when you persuade, it causes someone to take action. But here's the key. When you persuade them positively, you cause them to take positive action, which means the action that's in the interest of everyone involved. And again, allowing them to feel good about themselves. So that transcends, that transfers industry to industry, situation to situation. And like anything else, we utilize a system for doing this.
Well, Bob, give us a couple of thoughts on that. How would we do that?
Well, let's just take one example. You're at the ticket counter at the airport, and the person says, well, it looks like you're going to have to pay an extra $75, to make the change. Now, this actually happened to be where I was given a certain price and told it would normally be an extra $75, but they were able to waive it, put it into the computer, the whole bit. And then when I went to the ticket counter, the person, of course, didn't have that in there. And so she was you could tell she was in a bad mood anyway. And, the whole thing that happens sometimes when you have a lot of difficult customers to deal with. And she said, well, this will be an extra $75 to make the change. Well, you can look at this in a couple of ways. You can either, shout and scream and yell and rant and rave and the whole bit, which you see every day, and I see them at airports all the time because I'm always at airports, and it really doesn't help anyone, and all it would have done in that case is to make her even more determined that I was going to have to pay that $75. Now, in the big scheme of things, $75 isn't a big deal, but at the same time, it's always good to be able to practice. And $75 is $75. So, the first thing I had a choice to do was to win. But when I say win, I don't mean by making the other person lose. When I say win, I mean both of us being able to feel good about the conversation, good about the transaction in a way that's going to make the entire situation a positive outcome. So the first thing I knew I needed to do was to respond instead of react. This is very important. The Winning Without Intimidation program is based on a saying by the sages of old that says, who is a mighty person? And the answer is that person who can control their emotions and make of an enemy a friend. Really, that's nothing more than being in control of yourself, being the boss of yourself. Because the fact is you can't control another person. You can't control the situation, but you can control how you respond to that. So when you respond, you're controlling yourself, and thus you're in a position to take a negative situation, turn it into a positive. When you're reacting, you're letting outside circumstances, such as other people, control you. So Zig Ziglar, the great speaker and author, gives a wonderful analogy when it comes to responding and reacting. He says, if you go to the doctor and get some medication, you feel good, and the doctor says to you, well, you responded well to the medication. On the other hand, if you go back a couple of hours later, struggling to breathe, you're broken out in hives, the doctor may say, apparently the medication caused a bad reaction. And I think that's a great way to look at it. So I decided I needed to respond by just, letting her tell me why it was I had to pay the $75, which I could tell she wanted to do. And here's the key. I did it without interrupting her. And this is very key. And salespeople such as ourselves, boy, do we have a difficult time with that because, we're passionate about what we're talking about. And so my feeling was always, before I learned the system, my feeling was, well, why wait till a person finishes? I know what they're going to say anyway. And that, never comes across in a good way. So first thing was letting her finish without interrupting. The next thing I did is I agreed with her. I said, you're absolutely correct. In fact, the woman on the phone last night who was very helpful, she said, you are right. It would absolutely be at $75 to make the change. And you might think, well, wait a second. Why are you agreeing with her? Isn't that just allowing her then to say, well, okay, case closed? No, not really. Because really people just want to be respected. They want to be made to feel good about themselves. And this also ties into what I call the law of agreement, and that is nobody is going to argue with themselves. So when I say you're absolutely correct, what's she going to say? No, you're wrong. I was wrong. She's not going to say that at all. Now, the next part is we have to help them live in the solution. And I said, the woman on the phone last night did say something about she put it into the computer for us. Now, I said us, not me, not for you, but for us. So we're in this challenge together. In other words, we're teaming up. It's not you against me. And so, she's looking, but I also know at this point we have to, give the person a little help because if she now comes back, and she's got it in the system, that's not a problem. That was assured. So even though she's not feeling defensive about me anymore, there's still, people don't like to admit they made a mistake. So we've got to help them. And I call these words the 8 key words that will move a person to your side of the issue practically every time. And they will, as long as you've set it up right with patience and kindness and, courteous persistence and so forth. And what I said to her was, if you can't do it, I'll definitely understand. It gives them an out. It's saying to them, hey, I have confidence that you can do it. I have faith in you that you can do it. But, hey, it's not the worst thing in the world if you can't. I won't disrespect you if you can't. I say, and what happens is when you give a person an out, a back door, they're less likely to feel as though they have to take that back door.
It's almost like you're challenging them to find a solution on your behalf.
And they will. And, you can even follow up if you can't do it, I'll definitely understand by saying, if you could, I'd certainly appreciate it. And then, you can even a few seconds later, if you have to, you can say, hey, don't get yourself in any hot water over it. It's not that important. And so you're showing respect to this person. Now, here's what she said. She looks at the computer, looks at me, looks at the computer, looks at me, looks at the computer, looks at me, hands me a ticket and says, Mr. Burg, I can do it for you this time, but next time you will have to pay the $75. Gosh, that's not ego talking, right? Having to feel as though she still, and this happens, by the way, men, women, the boss, the secretary, everybody. People are people, and we've got to understand that we work out of an ego basis. All of us do. We make all decisions, all major decisions emotionally. We back them up with logic, or we rationalize, and if you break up the word rationalize, it turns into we tell ourselves rational lies. And so we're human beings. And so as long as we can show respect, genuine respect to another human being, let them know that we're on their side, and at the same time still use specific language that I've put together in this Winning Without Intimidation system to be able to help do that, boom. And so, I've done everything from helping people write letters to major corporations that when there was a complaint that they didn't think they were going to be listened to all these different things. And again, it's nothing that I've made up myself. These are all things I've learned from other people through the years. But really, it's just a system that makes the results very, very predictable.
Bob, this is great, and I'm sure a little bit of advice that's definitely opened some eyes. Now, where can we go to find out more?
Everyone's welcome to visit my website at burg.com, which is BURG.com.
Bob Burg, thanks so much for spending a few minutes with us. And that's it for now, folks. Sales Rep Radio is a production of the Marcom Store, the place for strategic sales communications and training, e-learning, video, and corporate podcasts just like this one. This is Dan Walker. Thank you so much for listening in, and be sure to subscribe to this podcast. We'll see you again next time for another edition of Sales Rep Radio.